throughout your entire life, have you always been much more sensitive to rejection, criticism, teasing, or even your own perception that you have failed or fallen short? This is something that Dr. William Dodson asked. Dr. Dodson is a board-certified adult psychiatrist who was one of the first practitioners to specialize in adult ADHD 25 years ago. Dr. Dodson asked that question to help determine if someone may have rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. RSD is not a diagnosis on its own, but it's thought to be a trait experienced by some people with ADHD. RSD is a trigger, wordless, emotional pain that occurs after a real or perceived loss of approval, love, or respect. This is not typical rejection, but a profound physiological reaction to perceived judgment or criticism. As Dr. Dodson explains, this is an overwhelming emotional experience that feels unbearable and that is extremely hard for people to describe. Welcome back to Light and Shadow. I'm your host, JF, and I title today's episode, Why It Hurts So Much, Deconstructing Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. So let me ask you a question. For those of you who experience this, why does a delayed text or a minor piece of feedback feels like a physical blow? In this episode of Light and Shadows, we deconstruct rejection sensitive dysphoria, the intense, visceral, emotional avalanche triggered by perceived failure or criticism. We will explore its psychological roots in childhood attachment styles, with insights from John Bowlby and Carl Jung, and across the bridge into spirituality to examine how RSD feeds on the illusion of separation. So tune in to discover 3 core practices to break the cycle. Step into Viktor Frankl's sacred space and anchor your divine worth from within. The architecture of the shadow, navigating RSD. Today we're diving into a painful, deeply painful, often invisible experience, rejection sensitive dysphoria. We will look at what it is, how to prevent its heavy grip from taking over your life, and how this intense psychological pain can actually become a portal for profound spiritual awakening. Part 1, Defining the Shadow. What is RSD? Let's begin in the shadows. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is not just getting your feeling hurts. It is an intense, overwhelming emotional response to perceived or actual rejection, criticism, or failure. For someone experiencing RSD, a minor critic or a delayed text does not just cause a moment of doubt, it triggers agonizing emotional avalanche. The famous Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung once said, "The emotional response is always a sign that a complex has been touched." When RSD flares up, a massive psychological complex is triggered. Your body misinterprets a social slight as a literal threat to your survival. The shadow convinces you that you are fundamentally unlovable, cast out, and isolated. Consider this example. You submit a project at work. Your manager responds with, "This is a good start. Let's tweak a few lines." A standard mind sees a collaborative edit. An RSD impacted mind reads, "You failed. You are incompetent. They are going to fire you." The emotional pain is so visceral, it can feel like a physical blow to the chest. Part 2, the root of the shadow, or what I call childhood dynamics and attachment. To stop creating and feeding the shadow, we must understand where it was born. RSD does not appear out of thin air. It is almost always rooted in early childhood dynamics and our primary attachment style. As children, our physical and emotional survival depends entirely on our caregivers. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, dependent on your grades, your performance, your obedience, or your ability to keep the peace. Your young mind learned a dangerous lesson. I am only safe when I am perfect. If I fail or displease someone, I will be abandoned. This creates what psychologists call an anxious or insecure attachment style. Famous British child psychiatrist and attachment pioneer John Bowlby famously noted, "What cannot for a moment be tolerated is being rejected. For a child, rejection equals death. If a parent was emotionally unavailable, highly critical, or unpredictable, the child's nervous system developed hypervigilance. You became an expert at reading micro expressions, scanning the room for any sign of anger or disappointment. As an adult, that hypervigilant child is still running the show. When a romantic partner needs space or a colleague critique your work, your inner child doesn't see a normal adult interaction. It sees the terrifying threat of childhood abandonment. The shadow of RSD is simply the adult echo of a child's ancient survival strategy. Part 3. The spiritual correlation, or what I call the illusion of separation. So where do the light and spirituality meet this intense psychological darkness? In many spiritual traditions, the ultimate source of suffering is the illusion of separation. The belief that we are isolated ego's self, cut off from the whole. RSD is the ego self operating in full hypervigilance. It is the wounded ego desperately trying to protect itself from the pain of being disconnected from others. When we experience RSD, we are outsourcing our divine worth to external validation. We are telling the universe, I am only whole if that person approves of me. Psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl beautifully captured the space where healing begins. He wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. Spiritually, RSD completely bypass that space. The stimulus, the perceived rejection, instantly collapse into the response of despair and anger. Heal RSD spiritually, we must reclaim that sacred space Frankl speak of. We must anchor our identity not in the shifting opinion of the world, but in the unchanging light of our internal essential being. Part 4, deepening the shadow, or what I call relationships and creativity. To truly understand how RSD operates, we must look where our ego are the most vulnerable. Our romantic relationships and our creative expressions. These are the arenas where we expose our true selves, making the threat of rejection feels catastrophic. The romantic mirror, hypervigilance, and preemptive flight. In romantic relationships, RSD acts like a faulty smoke alarm, constantly crying fire when there is only a change in temperature. When we love someone, our spiritual longing for union is profound. But if RSD is driving, any signs of pulling away, even as a natural human need for space, is interpreted as abandonment. Famous psychiatrist Harry Stack Sullivan, who pioneered interpersonal psychoanalysis, noted, we need to be accepted by others before we can accept ourselves. For the RSD sufferer, this need becomes an exhausting obsession. The example, your partner comes home exhausted from work. They kiss you quickly, sigh heavily, and then sit in silence looking at their phone. The RSD reaction, the shadow whispers, they are losing interest. They are bored of me. I did something wrong. So to cope, the RSD mind might launch a shutting down and withdraw first to protect itself. Here, we turn our partner into an idol. We expect them to act as a sole source of our peace, forgetting that their human exhaustion has nothing to do with our spiritual worth. The creative workplace, or what I call the vulnerability of execution. Now let's look at the creative workplace. Whether you are a designer, writer, marketer, entrepreneur, creativity is inherently a spiritual act. It is bringing something from the unmanifested realm into physical form. You pour your soul into your work, but when RSD enters the office, professional feedback feels like a personal execution. The example: you present a creative concept. You spend weeks developing. A colleague says, "I don't think this direction fits our current brain strategy. Let's pivot." The RSD reaction: the, the critique of the work is absorbed as a critique of your being. The RSD mind says, "I am untalented. I don't belong here. They think I'm a fraud." This triggers a dangerous coping mechanism: perfectionism or creative paralysis. You stop taking risks. You create a safe, boring work because the agony of another critique is too much to bear. And the spiritual distortion: we mistake this creation for the creator. We forget that our art is just a river flowing through us. It is not our identity. Part 5: Preventing the script, or what I call how to avoid creating RSD. How do we avoid creating, reinforcing, and feeding this painful pattern in our love lives and our careers? How do we stop the shadow from writing our daily script? Prevention requires a blend of psychological rewiring and spiritual grounding. Here are 3 core practices to stop RSD from taking root in your daily life. Number 1, challenge the narrative, the reality check. RSD thrives on mind reading. You assume that you know exactly what someone else is thinking, and it is always the worst case scenario. The shift: how do you combat that? Pause and ask for evidence. Spiritually, this is the practice of truth, or satya. Acknowledge a feeling of hurt, but separate the feeling from the objective fact. The fact is your partner is tired, or your boss wants a different design. The fiction is that you are unworthy. Number 2, decenter the ego. RSD makes us the tragic main character of every event. If someone is in a bad mood, we assume it is because of something we did. The pioneer of analytical psychology, Carl Jung, noted, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." When you choose to become the observer rather than the victim, you realize other people's reactions are almost always about their internal shadows, not yours. If a coworker snaps at you or a partner needs space, it's a reflection of their stress, not a verdict on your soul. Number 3, radical self-compassion as a spiritual shield. We cannot always stop the initial sting of RSD, but we can stop the secondary suffering, the way we punish ourselves for feeling hurt. The practice is when the wave of dysphoria hits, do not fight it or shame yourself. Sit with it just for a few seconds. Place a hand on your heart and say, "I am feeling triggered right now." And that's okay. This feeling is a shadow, but it is not my sky. By offering yourself unconditional love in the moment of perceived rejection, you break the cycle. You stop generating the shame that keeps RSD alive. Part 6. The light anchor, what I call affirmation segment. As we begin to close today's episode, I want to give you a spiritual shield, a set of affirmation designed to anchor your nervous system when the shadow of RSD flares up. I invite you to place a hand on your heart, take a deep breath, and let these words settle into your subconscious. You can memorize them, repeat them in moments of panic, and use them to reclaim your sacred space. Phrase 1, I am safe in this moment. The storm in my body is an echo of the past, not the truth of the present. Phrase 2, my worth is inherent, divine, and whole. It cannot be granted by applause, and it cannot be taken away by criticism. Phrase 3, other people's reactions are a mirror of their own path, not a verdict on my soul. I release the burden of mind reading. And phrase 4, I am no longer the rejected child. I am the conscious adult, capable of holding my own heart with radical love. Conclusion: turning shadow into light. As we close today's journey into the light and shadow, remember that rejection sensitive dysphoria is a profound teacher disguised as a tormentor. It shows you exactly where you are still seeking permission to exist. In love, it reminds us to anchor our worth within. In creativity, it reminds us that our value lies in the act of expression, not the applause. The next time the shadow of rejection looms, do not run from it. Use it as a signal to turn inward, to breathe, and to remember that your worth was never yours to lose and never theirs to give. And this brings me to my weekly reminder. How have you shared your light this week? For me, this podcast and answering your message is partly how I shine mine. Helping others is also how I shine. If I can help just one person today with this podcast feel better, then my job is done. I encourage you, as always, to share the light within you, to family, with your neighbors, your community, your co-workers, and you know what? Especially strangers. Thank you for listening. If this episode helped you find your footing, please share it or leave me a message as to how RSD affected you. I love to read your comments. You sharing your light to me sharing my light, and I love it. So remember, you deserve peace, you deserve safety, and you are deeply loved. Until next time, take care of your heart and soul. And as always, I wish you love, light, and shadows. Until next week.